Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here today. My name is Megan Leaders. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Sonatype. And today I am joined by Tosha Ellison, who is joining me from FINOS. And we are so excited about this discussion of another iteration of our Regulate to Innovate. And this is going to be focused on compliance and innovation around open source and finance. So, Tosha, very nice to have you with us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to dive right in. And while we are huge fans of FINOS, a member of the organization, I thought maybe we could start with just tell everybody what FINOS is.
Yes, so we are the FinTech Open Source Foundation, and we're the financial services vertical of the Linux Foundation. And so our whole goal is to get the financial services industry, so that's banks, asset managers, hedge funds, exchanges, brokerages, really the whole industry to collaborate through open source practices and tooling and software. And it's been a little bit of an uphill battle, but we're really making tremendous progress now. So again, we're all about getting the financial services industry to collaborate together through open source.
Yep. And we love it. We see it. So many of our customers are financial services customers. And to see that growth of open source amongst them has been fabulous. And really having your oversight has been instrumental. And we both know that, right, financial services industry, it relies heavily on open source software, but uniquely it faces super strict regulations, right? They've got both dichotomies going on. How do you see that balancing between embracing open source and managing regulatory compliance evolving over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're correct that it's huge consumers of open source, right? Our community members tell us that 90% of the software leverages some amount of open source. So anyone who says we're not using open source just might not be as well informed as they should be. So massive consumers. And that has been for, quite a number of years. I think we've seen the financial services industry ramp up in similar ways to other industries, although we were maybe a little bit behind. And as you mentioned, there's huge amounts of regulation, and this regulation has been in place for a long time, but we've also seen that ramp up after the financial crisis. Those regulations really started coming in faster and faster and faster, and we don't see that slowing down at all. And those regulations for banks are really pervasive. So it's related to the banking practices. So risk management, know your client, making sure that you are protecting your client's data, in addition to all of the technology focused regulations that other industries have to deal with. Financial services has those, and then some extra ones on top of that. So it really is super regulated. But I do think there's an opportunity for it to be a very symbiotic relationship, right? So if you can embrace the fact that you're using open source and implement good open source practices and policies, really the best practices, including open source and a lot of those established practices that banks and other financial institutions already have, then you can actually meet your regulatory requirements, in a much better, easier way. So taking that holistic approach of, all right, we're going to do the right thing, that's going to help us meet our requirements, and using open source, open source has actually a lot of advantages to being able to be compliant and to meet those regulations as well. So it's not a solved problem. There's still lots to do. There's still lots of challenges, but I do think that as the industry continues to recognize the value of open source, they will double down, and that will help them with their compliance as well. And so in that way, I think in the future, it can be a good relationship and not one filled with tension.
Yeah, and especially with so much innovation happening in the financial services, knowing that they are so wedded, as many companies are, to open source, and finding that balance, because there is that desire to see everything progress and have that innovation. And I know recently you had the 2024 State of Open Source and Financial Services report that went out. If we look at that report, there were security challenges the financial institutions face with open source software. What are they? How should we think about them and protect against it?
Yeah. So I think, we continue to see, so financial services is at very high risk for attacks. So that's always been the case, but that also continues to increase. So there continues to be a focus on security, as there has been for a long time. One of the challenges that we, saw in the report is that controlling the environments, controlling the open source that's in the environment, there is good confidence. 30% of people were extremely confident that the open source software in the organizations was well controlled. 54% somewhat confident. And then when you look at how that software is being maintained and kept up to date, 37% extremely confident, 47% somewhat confident. And so those are reasonable numbers. But again, when you aren't sure what open source is in use in your organization, and if those vulnerabilities are around, then you are at big risk, right? And so that really does need to be locked down. And we can talk about lots of ways that you can do that, and the organizations are doing that. So that's certainly one of the things we found. And then also some of Sonatype's research has shown us that can actually even be optimistic. So there are still challenges around making sure that the components in use are maintained, are controlled. I think that's one of the biggest ones. And then we also look at what practices organizations have in place for consuming open source software. And, a good 30 to 40% are doing all the right things, right? They're managing what they do. They're looking at licenses. They're making sure that they have formal review processes. They're requiring developer training. They have tooling. But that's not really enough, right? 40% isn't really enough. We really need the organizations to be at 100%, 90%. And we are seeing a very positive trend in implementing that tooling and that processes to reduce those risks and those vulnerabilities. But there's still a ways to go. And so I think that's definitely one of the challenges that the industry needs to continue to tackle.
Yeah, and obviously in our business we see it all the time. And you're right, the awareness throughout the organization and all that training helps, but it is the awareness because this software could be old, it could be new. There's so much that can factor into it. And I know there's been positive change. We're seeing improvements through collaborations. Do you have an example or two that you could share that others could benefit from, of how they've taken a look at their organization and some of the pieces and elements they put into place to see that positive change on the security side?
Yes. So we have, I always think of our foundation as being like in two different parts of the foundation. One is open source readiness, which I'm going to talk about more specifically. And then the other one is projects and standards that all of the institutions collaborate on together. That's beneficial. But that mainstay of open source readiness has always been fundamental to FINOS and its community members. And what it does is it helps firms who don't know what to do when it comes to managing open source, both consumption and contribution. It really lays out lots of resources and tools. And so our industry of financial services practitioners and tech and services organizations who work closely, with the banks and asset managers, they come together and they have developed a body of knowledge that is extensive, that helps those organizations figure out how to start in open source. There's a license handbook, what licenses, and that's going to help your compliance managers bring in open source software faster, because they have a reference. They have this body of knowledge that the industry together has put together. There's a maturity model, and that maturity model, the organizations can go through it and see where they're doing well, where they're not doing well. And that includes lots of security aspects as well. So where do we need to improve or develop our security? And so I think this is, it's enabling better consumption across the industry. And when you can enable that safer, better consumption and that collaboration, then you can do the really innovative things. So some of the things so that's sort of foundational. And then building on from that, for example, we have an AI readiness SIG. And they've just produced an initial draft framework that shows, here are risks and here's how you can control them. And these were put together by people across the industry coming up with use cases about how to use AI securely and safely in financial services. And so we're really able to bring together the SMEs that can help establish protocols, practices, tooling that can then be used across the industry to take advantage of the new technologies that are coming about, cloud and AI, for example.
I love it. And I wanted to ask you about AI because it's here, right? We're all using it, and financial services in particular is at the one of the ones that industries at the forefront of implementing it and integrating it into their everyday practices. And there has to be that balance between open source institutions and financial institutions being leveraged together, but how we maintain that strong security. Any thoughts there? And again, knowing that it's happening right before our eyes, and there's still a lot to go learn in the future, but any initial thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think, as you say, financial services has been using AI to some extent for a long time, right? There are things that it's helped, standard processes where you know what to expect. It can help automate those. Great with numerical things. But now there really has been a step change, and there are really some tremendous opportunities to streamline efficiencies, to operationalize more. But what part of the challenge that the banks are facing right now is there's been this democratization of AI. And so now, because everybody can get their hands on it, FSIs say, oh, shoot, okay, well, now we really need to control this. We have to understand how it's being used. And so I think that's where these groups that are developing this framework, specifically with this industry in mind and how they have to be controlled and how, but they still need to take advantage of, they can't be left behind, right? Because they have to meet their clients. And also, financial services organization, they used to attract talent, technology talent, engineering talent, when I started over 25 years ago. And now it's big tech. People want to go to big tech because that's where they see the innovation happening. So I think also leveraging open source, collaborating with each other to implement these guardrails that regulators are also on board with. So we're reaching across the divide, working with regulators so that they understand that we're doing the right things now will let us innovate and attract that talent and, bring the benefits back to our clients and to our, and to keeping our systems secure and safe too, and operationally sound.
That's right. And when you say these things, the thought that comes to mind is now we were doing a lot of work before, and now we're doing it with AI. And how do we think about coupling all these elements together and scaling it, right? How do we do all of that and yet still stay ahead and in compliance with regulations and all the changing regulations? What advice, what can you offer up to financial institutions aiming to think this way of how they're going to really integrate open source software at scale?
Yeah. So I think they need to invest. They need to accept that if we want to innovate, if we want to use AI safely, if we want to use the cloud safely in a controlled environment and really be able to take advantage of all that it's offering, they need to invest in establishing OSPOs, open source program offices, making sure that you have the controls in place, making sure that you're doing supply management. They really need to be fully embracing open source, both from a consumption perspective and a contribution perspective. Because we also know that if you can't contribute, then you're much more at risk. You're much more vulnerable. You can't make those fixes. You get tied in and locked in more. So that would be my biggest message is if you want to take advantage of all that open source has to offer, including innovation in AI and cloud and other places, that they really need to be doubling down on that investment and accepting it as a core part of how technology will work going forward.
That's right. I could not agree more. The investment has to be there. And we are seeing glimmers of that happening throughout our customer base as well. And so I'm glad to hear you echo that as well. So Tosha, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll ask, is there anything else that you want to leave or to share with the audience before we wrap?
I think wherever your organization is or wherever you as an individual are in terms of open source, take the next step, right? You can keep improving always. And it's okay if you're a little bit behind. That's no reason not to start now. So just start building from wherever you are and don't be afraid to take the next step and encourage your managers to take the next step and their managers. And that's how we'll all get there.
Yeah, I love that. And again, use FINOS. You guys are a source of materials and reference, and the members there alone could be great offer great antidotes and insights to those other financial institutions that are looking to lean in a little bit more. So, Tosha, again, thank you so much for joining today as part of our Regulate to Innovate series, and we are so grateful for your time. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much.